Now, in an earlier module, we had talked about the precursors that led to the Vietnam War. The country had been divided. There were supposed to be elections to unify the country, but the United States had backed South Vietnamese government, the South Vietnamese government under Ngo Dinh Diem, and they had refused to hold the elections because it was well known that communist leader Ho Chi Minh would most likely win those elections. Okay, now the U.S. following the policy of containment, right? Remember, we were talking about the Cold War and trying to contain communism so it doesn't spread to other countries. So the U.S. following the policy of containment during President Kennedy's administration has supported the idea of calling off these elections. Okay, this is part of the policy of containment. But Diem, the leader of South Vietnam, had enemies in South Vietnam beyond just the communists, okay, including Buddhists and even soldiers within his own army. He wasn't a well-liked person, okay, the leader of South Vietnam, Ngo Dinh Diem. Eventually, civil war erupted in South Vietnam, okay, so a civil war in South Vietnam. So you have on one side the communist Viet Cong. These are communists that live in South Vietnam. And then you have the South Vietnamese army, which was trained by the CIA. Okay, so the US is playing a role here. So the Viet Cong forces grew due to anger in South Vietnam against the corruption of Diem's regime. Okay, like I said, he's not a very well-liked person. Okay? Eventually, Ngo Dinh Diem was overthrown and he was assassinated, okay, but the Civil War continued. Now, under Kennedy, the US sent in a large number of military advisors to support the South Vietnamese government in the Civil War. The US officially got involved after a US ship, which was illegally in the waters off of North Vietnam, after this ship was shot at by the North. Okay, this is the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Now, of course, if a foreign ship is found in your waters, it's probably going to get attacked, right? And so you have this US ship which was illegally in the waters of North Vietnam. Remember, North Vietnam is communist, okay? And this is taking place during the administration of President Johnson. Now, Johnson, he did not reveal to the public, to the American public, that this ship was in North Vietnamese waters, okay? Instead, he used the Gulf of Tonkin incident to get the US further involved in the war, okay, in the civil war going on in South Vietnam. Now, under President Johnson, American ground troops were officially sent in to engage in combat, okay? So previously under Kennedy, there were just military advisors, right? But now you officially have American troops on the ground fighting in this civil war. There was also a large bombing campaign of North Vietnam, which took place under Johnson, President Johnson. The US also used chemicals like Agent Orange, which was used to eliminate vegetation since the communists were using the heavy jungle vegetation to conduct guerrilla attacks on the US and South Vietnamese army. The US also used something called napalm, okay, dropping napalm on the communist Viet Cong. And napalm, it burns your skin. And it's hard to get it off, and it does terrible damage, a horrible weapon being used in the Vietnam War. Now, the 1960s was a period that involved a number of different civil rights movements. We'll talk about some of these in a little bit, right? But many of these different movements came together and converged on the issue of the Vietnam War. The public in the United States, they increasingly became critical of the war as more and more American troops were being sent to Vietnam. Many young Americans, such as those who made up what was called at the time, the New Left, argued that America had no right getting involved in the issues of Vietnam. They felt that the policy of containment, right, containing communism, that was contributing to the unnecessary deaths of thousands of young Americans. Okay, so containment's not a good thing, right? People are dying because of this policy of containment during the Cold War. Why not just stay out of the Vietnamese Civil War? There's no point in the U.S. getting involved. This is what the new left is saying, right? These young people who are protesting the Vietnam War. Okay, so they'd rather that Vietnam just deal with their own problems. Why should the U.S. get involved? And you know what? From their perspective, from the perspective of the new left, if Vietnam ends up becoming a communist country, so what? So be it. Let it go, right? Forget the policy of containment. This is what young people are saying. They're starting to turn against the Vietnam War. They're beginning to come together and protest against the war. One of the more influential New Left organizations, the Students for a Democratic Society, or the SDS, they were involved in organizing a large anti-war demonstration in Washington, D.C., which brought together people of multiple ethnic backgrounds and economic backgrounds, right? So you got a bunch of different people coming together to protest the Vietnam War in D.C., and this organization, Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, had organized this protest. Many middle-class college students began to question the culture of conformity that had taken shape during the 1950s. They acted out. Some people became hippies. They grew out their hair. They listened to rock and roll. They experimented with drugs. This was the youth movement known as the counterculture. Okay, as in, moving counter to the clean-cut, controlled society of the Cold War 1950s.